I am so excited. We have people from all over here. We've got just about 200 here, so I'm going to get started. I wanted to talk to you about a few things. I'm hoping to share a few tips and techniques that you have not learned yet. I know so many of you have been painting for a long, long time, so it's kind of hard to learn something new. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about the lining of your lettering. A lot of you said you had a hard time with this. And I love the IdentiPens for this reason, because, as we get older, we have shakier hands or whatever. But I wanted to say that you can press really hard with this IdentiPen, or just like with a liner brush, you can press softer and make lighter lines. So you can see that was with a lot of pressure, and then this is with a little bit of pressure. So when I am doing the lettering, I use a very light touch. Also, when you're on the wood, if you're pressing really hard, you might have gotten some jagged edges. So I know that's kind of extreme. So what you can do, and that those jagged edges are just because there's texture to the surface. So what you can do is just go in and spend a little bit of time smoothing them out. I don't want anybody to hate their project because they don't like their lettering. So what will happen is your lines might look a little bit thicker, but you can still save them. Okay. So again, how much pressure you use with this pen makes a big difference. And when we're working on the birds, it's really going to make a big difference too, because we're going to be using the IdentiPen on there. And I can see a lot of you are saying you love learning new techniques. That's good. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk to you about creating a template. I gave you these line drawings, and I asked you to transfer it on the tracing paper, which is a good thing because we'll be using that later on. But what happens as we're going to go in and put the snow on, I created this, and I want to show this on the dark background. What I did is I created an extra, I just printed out an extra line drawing, and I cut out the areas where the snow is going to be. So this is going to be a template for me. It's kind of like a temporary stencil. And so whenever you're doing something and you need to isolate areas, you can do this. So then that way, as I'm teaching and I've already base coated this area, I can come in here and lay this down and protect my items that I've already base coated. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm also going to show you a second way to protect your items, since I didn't tell you to do this ahead of time. I thought of this, as a matter of fact, last night. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be some way. And, the reason I know this is because this is kind of a tool that's used with paper crafting. And so I thought that would be fun to show you and show you how it works. I want to talk a little bit about blending. The first thing we're going to need is you're going to need your stippling brush. And I just asked you to get an old scruffy. This thing, you can tell I left in the water too much. It's losing the paint on it, but it turned into a great scruffy brush. So I never throw brushes away. I think I have some smaller ones. So what I do is I save my old scruffies, and they really help me a lot when I want to create texture. I'm seeing that you guys are all loving my idea. Great. So I will tell you though, as soon as we use this, it's going to turn to mush because, obviously our paint's going to be wet. But you could actually, if you have a laser printer, you could print this out on vellum paper. Vellum paper is a little bit more stiff. You could use that. You could use a thin cardstock, print it out that way, and then that way you could reuse it multiple times. So there's ways of creating your own templates, aka stencils, at home with some paper products and a printer. So we're going to lay out the first 3 colors. And I've got some paper there. And you should all have your instructions. I am looking at the, and by the way, whenever in a class, I don't know about you, but I always get paint all over my instructions. So to put them in sleeves like this really helps because then you don't ruin your instructions. And I know for me, I will have paint everywhere by the time I'm done. It's just how I paint. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put out the first 3 colors for the snowman. They're on number 1. I talked a little bit about mixing color, and in the video, in the prep video, I also talked about that. What's really important when you're mixing colors is that you use a drop as a measurement tool, just like you would a teaspoon or a cup if you were measuring.
What paper did you use for the template?
I simply used the type of paper I actually used was just printer paper, and this was crummy printer paper, so it's not going to work really great. I see some people saying that they use freezer paper. I've never put freezer paper through my printer. I would be concerned because I have a laser printer that the heat might melt some of the wax on freezer paper. So, but anyway, you can experiment with this. That's what I do. That's how I come up with a lot of these ideas. I just think, well, gee, I need to put this snow on the snowman, and how can I do it? So the first color I've got out is winter blue. And I told you that if you don't have winter blue, you can mix this color. Then I'm going to mix winter blue with snow white. So again, when I'm mixing, what I'm doing is I let my puddles splay out. And I'm using DecoArt Americana paints, and they're nice and thick. So sometimes you have to bop your palette paper to make them flatten out. But what I want to do is I want to make sure my drops are the same size. If I use that measurement each time, I will get the same color. So you don't have to be afraid about mixing paints. I also always try to put my paints in what's called value scale order. So I've got dark, medium, light. And that will help you too when you're painting to know what color you should be in. Now I don't know if you can, yeah, you can see the white just fine on there. So what I'm going to do is move my instructions. So excited. We have about 235 people here. Welcome everyone. So now if you have an old brush and it's not open, what I just did is I dampened mine. And what I do is I really pull on it. I don't just do this, I really pull on it to open it up. So it's nice and open like that. And so I don't know if you can see how fuzzy that is. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in the darker one. And I'm loading a fair amount into my brush because the first app this is going to be 2 applications on the snowman. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to do first. So I'm starting with my dark color. And let's say that this is the bottom. Now this is going to look really light because I'm pouncing on a gray background. And I'm going to come out, and so I'm saying that that's the shaded color. Now I'm going to move into the next color, the color that I just mixed. And I'll start off here, and then I'll move back into it. Because what I'm trying to do is create a new value and then just blend the two colors together. As I'm blending, I use a softer touch. And I'm not sure if you can see the difference in value that much there. Let me come into my white, and again, I'm coming off. And you can see this is loaded fairly heavy. I'm not trying to create texture. I'm trying to pounce values together. And this is just going to save us time. So now what I'm doing is I'm trying to blend these two colors together. So I'm going to use ever so light of a touch. So you can see it's going from dark to light, but there's no harsh lines. And what do I mean by a harsh line? I will show you. So this is my darker color. This is my middle value. And we're not seeing a lot of difference there because I still have white in my brush. Okay, and then here's my white. Can you see how there's a definite line there? We don't want to have a definite line, but what we're going to do is we're going to take our brush and we're going to soften it and see how poof, so easy that is to do. So now we're going to go on to the snowman. And I have 3 different size scruffies here that I can use, my old scruffies. I don't know what brushes you have, but I did just show how to open them up. So I'm going to work up here on the face, and then I'm going to lift this up and show you another way that you can protect your painting, because I didn't tell you how to do this ahead of time. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go into my darkest color, and I'm going to come around the outside, doing a whole circle. Now I might have to touch up some of my color that's underneath there for the hat, and that's okay. So I'm going back over and I'm blending. Now I'm going to pick up my white.
Will this be posted for viewing later? Okay.
So this class is being live streamed. For those of you who want to watch it a second time, it will be up. I'm going to leave it in the group for about a month, or till the end of the month, actually. Okay, so that was really wet into wet. And then I'm also going to come in with a smaller brush here. Over here, I'm going to just pounce the darker color. I'm not even going to worry about trying to make it a lighter color in gradation. It's just too small of an area to worry about. And I have a very, very, very small brush in my hand. If you don't have a small brush, you could even use like the tip of a number 3 round. So I am giving this a little bit of value change here. Okay, so now I'm going to lift this up. And it was off a little bit, but not too bad. So what I have is I have some Q-tips. We all know how to spit quick. So I'm going to just take this off of my vest really quick. Now, as I'm looking at the lines on my snowman, it didn't go all the way over. And so what I'm going to do is use a very small brush. I have an old spotter here. I'm going to just go in here. This is the darker of the colors. You can even use like a number 3 round. And I'm just filling this in. And then I'm cleaning it up with a Q-tip. Okay. I'm glad you all like this whole idea that the template is fun and it is handy. But there, you know, there's times you don't want to do that. Lots of times. This is kind of curvy. And so you could try to put tape down or something like that, but that would take a long time. So what I do before we go into the bottom, another thing I do is I just take some clean water and I really build it up along here. I don't want to, or you could use flow medium. But my medium for the most part is water. And so I've really built up a lot of water up there. So even if the water starts to dry, the residue should be there and we should be able to get in and get out and clean up. So this is why I always have paint on my hands, because now I've got my dirty brush and I want to open it up. So I'm going to start with my darker color, which is winter blue. And yes, I'm going to go right over my vest. There will be some paint there, but hopefully that water is going to help me clean it up. If you see it's starting to dry, don't worry about it. You can always touch it up with the base coat color. Okay, now I'm moving into the next color, which was our mixture. I start off a little bit and then I come back into it. And I'm trying to use ever so light of a touch so that I blend these colors together. And then I'm going to go into white, Snow White. And by the way, I am using a dirty brush. So when I go into Snow White, it's really a very light blue. So I'm going to come in here, putting in this big circle area. And then I'm using ever so light of a touch to blend this together. If I have trouble blending it, what I can do is go into the value that was next to it, which was that mid-tone blue. And I can come in and just go right over it like this. And then I can also go into my winter blue. The whole idea is we're trying to make it so that it's blending. And I really don't want to create any texture at this time. I'm just trying to make it blend. Because this is a way of base coating, creating a little bit of texture and putting in value. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn this a little bit. So because that water was there, I can pretty much get this all right up. And again, if I have to, like let's say this paint dried for some reason, I can always come in and touch it up with a base coat color. We'll give you a few minutes to do that and get caught up. Now over here, my blue came out a little bit. I'm not going to worry about that. It has bottom will just be a little bit fatter.
Can you use masking fluid?
question is, can you use masking fluid? You could, but it's expensive. It takes a long time to dry. And these two methods are a lot easier. Okay, so now I'm going to be using the same exact brushes. And we're going to go over it again, only this time I'm going to brighten it up a little bit. So I'm going to start in the lighter area. And you have to make sure that this is dry. Mine is dry. One other thing is you want to make sure that it's all the way up to your hat. I have a little bit of paint on here, but once I shade and highlight, it's going to be fine. I'll get rid of that. I'm not going to worry about touching that up. So I'm going to start in the white this time, but my white is very dirty, so I need to put out some new white. And when I'm saying white, I mean Snow White. Hey, I see my neighbors here. Hi, Marilyn. How are you? I always get so excited when I see so many of my friends. Linda's asking for the pattern. Linda, the pattern was in with the e-packet. In order to paint this, you will have to purchase the e-packet. Okay, so now what I've done is I've made my brush super fluffy. Let me go up here and see if you can see. See how fluffy that is? I spent a lot of time pulling on the hairs of my brush. And thank goodness they don't fall out. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to load my brush with less paint. Let me bring this over and I will show you. You can see what a mess I made on my palette.
Is there a stencil for the snowflakes?
The stencil that there was a question about the stencil for the snowflakes. All that information is in your e-packet. What I said is you can use any stencil that has a variation of size snowflakes. So I've loaded my brush and I have a lot less paint in my brush this time. And so I'm going to use a lighter pressure. And this time I'm creating a little bit of texture, if you can see that. So last time I was trying to blend. This time I'm just trying to create a little bit of texture using ever so light. Let me put it on an angle. Ever so light of a touch. So that was all white in here. And now what I'll do is I'll go into that mixture. And again, I'm loading my brush multiple times, just loading the tips. So you can see how he has a little bit of texture on him. Now these areas are really small. That would be really hard to do. So I'm going to leave those for right now. And let's go down here. I'm going to rinse out my brush. And again, once I rinse out my brush, I pull it really hard like this to really open it. And that's why I get paint all over my hands. I'm loading it just the tips of the brush, and I'm starting with white this time. And I'm using ever so light of a touch, and I'll go on an angle. Okay, now I'm going to pick up some of the mixture, loading just the tips. really getting into my brush, and now I'm using ever so light of a touch. If you come in hard or with a heavy hand, you won't be able to see this texture. Let me get some of my paper really quick. So, once again, what we're doing over here is we're coming in with a very, very light touch. So I can come in and use ever so light of a touch. But look what happens when I press down. So you see, I have a lot of paint in that brush, but what really makes it create the texture is how much pressure you put on that brush. Okay, I can see somebody's asking if you can use titanium white. I think Snow White and titanium white in the Americana line are the same. But what my husband answered was correct. There are lots of different tints of white. Like if you just compare the Americana cool white, warm white, and Snow White, they are all so different. Cool white is actually a very, very, very light shade of gray. So what we're doing right now is we're trying to create texture, and we're using ever so light of a touch instead of pressing hard. I'm so glad you're all here. I'm so excited. Again, I'm teaching, 230 people at once. Isn't Facebook awesome? Someone had asked if we were going to go into Zoom, and I said, well, we could, but your little squares would be so little, I wouldn't be able to see you at all. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to scrub a little bit with my Q-tip, and then I don't have to worry about going back over it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come in. If you all have your design transferred on the tracing paper, how many of you skipped this? Be honest. I bet you a lot of you do. How many of you just use your printout and print it multiple times?
Push it up just a little bit.
Pardon me?
Push it up just a little bit.
So is that where you want it, Bill? My husband's telling me I need to move my picture. Is this okay? Okay. So then what I'm going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to put in the face. And I like to use old graphite paper. Someone asked me if they could use carbon paper. You don't want to use carbon paper. Carbon paper is oil-based and it bleeds. So the biggest reason we use this, and I like to use an old one, is I don't like it to come in too harsh. So then we're going to just transfer on the eyes, all of the facial features. Okay. Now, if you guys need a line down the center of your vest, what you would do is you would use some white graphite. I'm going to just wing it. I originally drew this, so I can handle that. And again, some of you might have a little bit more shakier hand. I can tell that with the texture that was underneath there, it was just a little bit shaky. So what I do when I pull my lines, I make sure that my hand's nice and straight, and I just take my time with it and I try to make it look a little bit more smooth. What I will do before I line these is I want to come in and I want to base in the nose. And the nose is based with honey brown, and we're also going to base in the eyes with lamp black. I will tell you that the colors I used are being manufactured by Deco Art. I have worked with Rosemary Reynolds, and she's just such a wonderful lady, and she works with all of us helping artists, and she has sent out a list to all of us. They're manufacturing approximately 80 colors right now to help keep up with the demand. So I purposely now, and I know many other artists are only using those 80 colors so that you'll be able to find them. And honey brown is one of them. Make sure that you shape this really well. And we're going to just fill in his little nose. What I do when I'm working on small areas like this, I use a number 3 round and I just flatten it so I don't get any ridges. Again, this is honey brown. While we're waiting for that to dry, let's talk about the eyes a little bit. Now, what I like to do when I'm going to try to contain something is I like to outline them so they don't grow. And I know many of you have heard me say, don't let your eyes grow or don't let a particular icon grow. So again, I said to use a very, very soft hand. And what I'm going to do is very gently outline my eyes. Once they're outlined, and I'm using ever so light of a touch, I'll go ahead and I'll put in the mouth the same way. Now you can use your liner brush and you can use thinned lamp black. Why I like an Identa pen as opposed to a micron pen is because not only is this ink permanent, it's also waterproof. They're all made by Sakura of America, but Sakura of America also makes micro perms. Those are very similar to your micro pens, but the difference is this also has the same ink that an Identa pen has, which is waterproof and permanent. It should not bleed. And then in the few seconds I took to explain that to you, it's already set up. So we're going to go in and fill in those eyes. And now I can just stay in the center. How's everybody doing? You keeping up with me? I'm trying to go at a good pace so you can all keep up with me. I'm trying to repeat myself. Unfortunately, with not having you in my Zoom class, I can't see what you're doing. I hope you're all behaving yourselves. Okay, while we're waiting for that to dry, we're gonna put out some burnt umber. You can use traditional burnt umber, you can use regular burnt umber.
What size brush are you using?
I just put in the eyes and the nose with a number 3 round brush. Whatever small brush you have, you might have a small flat brush. And again, I like to use round brushes because I can turn them into flat brushes. I call them a number 3 round, the workhorse brush of decorative painting. So I'm putting out a little bit of burnt umber. And again, you can use traditional or not. Let's see what a messy palette I have. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over with some clean water. Got my number 3 round in my hand. And I'm just tinting the water with this burnt umber. Okay, and then what we're gonna do with that burnt umber is we're gonna wash in the branch. Again, this is all done with my number 3 round. The branches are different. On his right side, the branch, which is his arm, is behind the snow. On the left side, it comes up and over the snow. It's a different perspective. So this is going to be semi-transparent, which is fine. What I want it to do is I want it to settle down and be a little bit more dull with the color of that background showing through. It's also easier to put in a wash than to try to base coat multiple coats. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate your comment. Hello, my sister Melanie. I love when I have a lot of my students or family and friends in a class. It's so awesome. Okay, he's starting to look pretty cute. What do you think, guys? I know we need to make him come alive. Now, I want you to look at your snow and ask yourself, is your snow looking really blue or is it looking more white? Mine's looking a little bit too white. And yes, I'm a perfectionist when it comes to painting, but I want him to look more white than blue. So what I'm gonna do, and yes, I know I already have his face on, excuse me, I'm gonna come in. I should probably use a smaller brush. I'm just gonna give him a little bit more white by his cheeks. A little bit on his forehead. And down here, I'm gonna make it a little bit more white. I still want some gradation so that he does not look flat. But whenever you're painting at home, you have to make these judgment calls. I always like to step back from my work and ask myself, how does this look? What do I need? And in this case, as I'm looking at it, I'm saying, I'm thinking he's looking too blue. So now I just went into a smaller scruffy brush. What I find amazing is almost everybody, even newer painters, have old crummy brushes. And I think it's because some of us may not load our brush very nicely. Meaning we overload it and the paint gets stuck in the ferrule. One of your best cleanup tools is your finger. It came in a little bit too heavy. So I have this smaller brush in my hand. I'm gonna just put in a little bit of white here. And again, I'm not doing anything else to these. We're gonna come in and shade by the arms, so we're not gonna worry. But I think he's looking a little bit more white now, and I'm liking that better. What I want to do is I want to take a little bit of red out, and you're gonna, I had used for the hearts, I had used Santa Red or the Delta Ceramic Coat Opaque Red. I love the fact that Delta Ceramic Coat has 3 opaque colors. One is red, one is yellow, one is blue. We all know how hard it is to cover sometimes with red and yellow and blue because they can be very transparent colors. These are very opaque. But while I'll use that for my base coating today, right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Santa Red, which is the other color I said you could use because they're just about the exact same color. I'm just putting 1 drop out.
Was your wood source in the pattern packet?
Yes, the wood source is in the pattern packet, and someone already answered. It's from Copper Distributing. Yes, they're wonderful. And I know a lot of you have not gotten your wood pieces yet, but they were off during the holidays, and a lot of the orders came in while they were closed. So I've got way too much paint on my palette, but I want to show you. I'm going to make just a very light pink because we're going to dry brush the cheeks in. And yes, this messy palette, I want to show you right over here. What I'm going to do is just make a very, very light pink. Now, actually, you could use bright red if you wanted to. However, most of you would make him look like he's been playing with his mom's lipstick instead of making him look like he's cold. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that colored pink. And we're going to use a dry brushing brush. I had asked all of you to get the dry brushing set. Some of you said you couldn't find it. Whatever dry brushing brushes you have is that are the shape of a dome and have very short hair. These are nice and flexible. And I'm using my number 6. So what I'm going to do now, all this paper towel is very wet. What I like to do is I like to grab fresh paper towel when I'm dry brushing. So I'm going to load my brush, really load my brush, really push it in there. And so, yeah, it's up all the way by the ferrule. Can't do much about it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the brush. And so there's only a residue of paint left. Can you see how light that is? This is full strength. This is just a residue of paint. So that's what I'm saying is if you only have a residue of paint, you could easily just use red. But most people come in too hard. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use ever so light of a touch. I don't even want it to show. And then as I rub more and more and more, it's going to start showing up. And again, we want him to look like he's cold. We don't want him to look like he's been playing with mom's lipstick. Nice and soft. I agree, Amy just said, I love that we think in Man of Snow is cold and has rosy cheeks. Well, wait till you see my next design. He's actually drinking hot cocoa. So we know a snowman wouldn't drink hot cocoa, but yeah, we make them real, don't we? That's all the fun of it. So in the same manner, I'm going to mix a little bit of honey brown with white, approximately equal amounts, and we're going to put in a little bit of a highlight in here. And again, whenever you're going to be putting out your paint out into your palette, make sure you shake the bottle really well. Another thing I didn't point out is when you're mixing paint, I often see a lot of my students stop like this, where there's swirls in it. You can get into a lot of problems if you do that. What I want you to do is keep mixing until it's all one color. So that's actually, it's kind of probably like camel, but camel's not one of the colors that they're making, so we're mixing it. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my little number 2 or my little number 0, whichever small dry brushing brush you have. And I'm going to load my paint. Now, instead of doing circles like this, what I'm going to do is just pull those in, and that's kind of hard to see. So what I did, and I'm going to do it really big, I just kind of stroked it in, and that will add some texture too. Can you see that? Not very light. Okay, I'm going to go in way too heavy. I stroked it in like that, only it was a residue of paint again. Were we supposed to enlarge the snowman from the one that you sent? No, this is approximately 9 by 12, and I wanted you to keep it the exact same size. Does this look larger? Possibly, I don't know. So I'm doing this a second time because I had a very light hand when I put that in. Now, hopefully you still have some burnt umber on your palette. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go in and just float. I'm loading 2 hairs on my brush. I always use a brush that's probably, you all would figure it feels too big for an area, but this is a 1/2 inch brush. And I'm gonna just shade the bottom and the back with some burnt umber. Pretty.
You got quiet.
Okay. If I put my hand here, Melanie, you can see that it's approximately 9 by 12. So no, I didn't make it bigger for class. Okay, I'm going to zoom in so we can see his eyes a little bit. And I'm going to pick up some white in my brush. Now for this, if you all need to use a smaller brush, that's fine. There are times where I will use an angle brush to float, and this would be one of them. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and we're going to float in some highlights. I am going to use a very soft float of white. If you tend to have a heavier hand, you would use maybe the mid-tone blue or even winter blue. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna just float this outside edge. And I want that to be ever so light. But it was just a little bit too light, so let's see. So now that's too heavy. I want it to show for you, but I want it to be very thin, very narrow. Okay, so now I'm going to have to turn this guy upside down, and I'm going to do this outer edge. Okay, hang on. My husband's in here. He's rearranging my camera.
Your camera's bouncing, so your picture's bouncing off.
Okay. Okay, so you can all see where we have the highlights in here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to just take a stylus or the tip of a liner brush. Let me get my liner brush. And I'm using white. And I'm going to just put a small dot in the upper portion of his eyes. Now, while I have that paint loaded in my brush, I'm going to go ahead and put just a little tiny C-stroke on both of his cheeks. And I can also just put in a few little glints on his nose. I'm thinning some lamp black. And I'm going to come in and put in some eyelashes. Now you can use your Identi-Pen for this. You can leave the eyelashes off. I like giving him a few eyelashes. I use ever so light of a touch. I start in on the pupil and then I bring it out like that. Turn him this way because I can see I lost this line here. Okay, that one came in a little bit too heavy because I had some water. So what I can do, if I don't like that, is I can wipe it off and let it dry. And the now is go over the mouth because I really do like it lined with the paint rather than a pen. And again, if you have a hard time controlling your liner brush, then you don't have to do any of these. You can use the Identi-Pen and use very light pressure. Now what we're going to do is just put in some cute little eyebrows. Let's take our Identi-Pen and for our, we're going to use again the narrow side. And I'm going to outline. Let me zoom out. Otherwise, I'm never going to stay in the screen. I'm outlining the branches. And then what I'll do is add just a few extra lines to indicate that it is a branch. Don't go crazy with these. Then as you come in, and I'm going to turn it this way, I add some curved lines to indicate the texture of the branch. And this is all that's going to happen to these branches. Didn't do a lot with them. Later on, if you want to put some snow on them, you can. I'm going to do the same thing to this branch or to this arm. For those of you who have neither an IdentiPen nor have a microperm, I would not use a micropen. What I would simply do is use your liner brush.
Is your IdentiPen black or brown?
The IdentiPen is black. I don't know if they make brown. I know they make red and green IdentiPens. These are wonderful markers that you can use on glass too. And that's why I know they have red and green, because I've used them on glass ornaments before. So this is what my IdentiPen looks like. We're also going to go in then and we're going to outline his nose. And again, I'm using ever so light of a touch. There's a couple of reasons why you want to use ever so light of a touch. One is it keeps the lines thinner. And the other reason is you don't get too much paint built up on the marker itself. If you're finding that it's not working anymore, it could very well be that the paint has been wet and it's clogged your IdentiPen. He's looking happy and he now has hands so he can hold these hearts. But let's work on the vest. And I know many of you do not like mixing colors. I apologize that a lot of this had mixed colors, but when you only have a handful of colors to work from, sometimes you just have to mix them in order to get them to lay down right. So I'm now putting out equal amounts of graphite and slate gray. So again, what I'm doing is I'm letting the paint splay out. And can you see how this one's just a little bit smaller than the other one? So I just a little bit more. Because I know if I make equal drops each time, as long as I'm using the same bottles of paint, it is going to be the same color. And then I'm going to mix them completely so that there's no swirls in them. I can also tell you, oh, someone just posted a whole thing of all the colors that they have with IdentiPens. And yes, they do have a brown. They also have a purple one. I have to get that. So we've got our gray color and we're going to be doing some dry brushing. And I just managed to spill all of my brushes. Caught it in time. I'm trying to get my soapstone. Here we are. I did not call for a soapstone. It's just something I use when I'm teaching, because then I can draw my lines in. What's really awesome about a soapstone is that as soon as you touch it with water, it disappears completely. That's so much fun. Okay, I'm going to use my number 8 to dry brush with first. Number 8 mounds around. Number 8 mounds around, and I'm going to load my brush, really put the paint in there. I've got my special paper towel that is not wet. I've kept this to the side so that I can use it for dry brushing. I have a residue of paint in it. Now I have to turn him upside down. And what I like about these brushes is you can go right up to a line, and that's because it has the dome shape. So I'm going back and forth first, and then I'm going to use a circular motion. Your speed will probably be something like this. I've been dry brushing for 28 years, so I can go a little faster. All my friends in Memphis remember when I used to cut stencil brushes so that they could dry brush with me. So what's really important is as you are finishing this up, it should not be going over to the side, and you should have some gradation to it. The way you get gradation is you lift your hand up and you barely touch down. So you can see it's in about that area there. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to dry brush along this edge down here. And again, I'm using my number 8. And I'm going back and forth to begin with. And then I'm using a circular motion. And again, your speed will probably be more like this. So now, right now I have a residue in my paint. I don't press harder. What I do is I just let that kind of skim out so I get a nice gradation. It's my favorite part of dry brushing is when I have that super residue in my brush. So now this side's going to get some too, but it's going to be more in the center because we're going to shade over here. It's going to be right under where that heart's going to be. So you're like, well, Debbie, why are you going to highlight if the heart's going to be there? Well, because this area of his vest is going to be a little bit lighter than the other areas. Someone asked, what is this brush? In your instructions, I asked you to get the Debbie Co. Creative Blending set. There's a set of 4 brushes. This is what I use in all my designs to dry brush with. And yes, in my instructions, I always put all the supplies you need. So see how nice and soft it is? There's no obvious start and stop. And I like that. I think it's looking good. I can tell I had a pattern underneath here. It picks it, sometimes dry brushing will pick up a pattern. Like what I mean by a pattern, I mean actual physical texture. But that's okay. Okay, so for me, this is wonderful. Now, if you have a really light hand, you may have to go in and do this a second time. I'm not going to worry about coming in a second time because I think this has got just, someone just said that I think they just got their brushes in the mail. That's good. I no longer carry these brushes on my website. I send everybody to the brush guys. A lot of times their website will say they're out of them. If they do, call them because they're always getting them in, or they're very slow in getting them up on the website. They almost always have them, or they're in the process of getting them. Okay, so we're going to put out some lamp black. If the lamp black that you had out is still fresh, you can use that. We're going to be floating. And mine has a nice skin on it, so I don't know that I'm going to put out some fresh. So mine has a little skin on it. And what happens when you have a skin on your paints, it's like driving with your foot on the gas pedal and on the brake at the same time. So part of that paint doesn't want to flow out of your brush because it's drying. So that's why whenever you hear people say you have to have fresh paint, that's one of the reasons why, is it just doesn't come out of your brush properly when it starts to dry. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to walk out a float. So what I tend to do when I walk out my float is I tip my brush just a little bit towards the water edge, which takes pressure off the painted edge. I'm going to come along the bottom of his hat. And this one area here, the reason I said I wasn't too worried about where the blue went, because what I can do is just float right over there and poof, it's all cleaned up. Okay, I did forget one highlight. So let me go into my liner brush, and with that color that we mixed for the highlight that we dry brushed with, I'm going to thin that just a little bit and make an ink-like consistency or cream-like consistency. Basically the consistency that you need to use. I'm so excited that we have people here from all over the world. How exciting is that we can all talk to each other because we all love painting and we can gather together here. So what I'm going to do with that thinned gray color is I'm using my liner brush and I'm just going to put that along the top edge. Okay. So I've now shaded underneath here, and then that was the first highlight. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to shade in the back parts. I'm going to come in and go underneath. I'm on the vest. The paint edge is towards the scarf. And I am going right up next to that scarf and shading the vest with a lamp black. I hope you're all having fun. I can't see you. talked about walking out a float. Now, this is a great background, so you're going to be able to see this a little bit better. So when I float, I have a gradation in my brush. And as I walk out my float, I can keep going and going and going without a lot of streaks because I've got my brush tipped to the water side. I also use Golden Natural brushes, which carry more water in them than a regular Taklon brush. Some people like that, some people don't. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we're going to separate this. So I just went down here. So we were up here. I went underneath his scarf on both sides. And now I just came down right here. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to come down and around and pull my brush down. For me, I should probably have a bigger brush in my hand. I have sent a small child to do a man's work, but that's okay. So this covers about a ½ inch. Over here on this side, I'm going to just keep this right along the edge. The right side is a little bit lighter than the left side. Generally, I always use an upper right-hand light source. Then I'm going to use ever so light of a touch and come along the bottom. That also cleans up any snow that I might have had on it. So I'm going to repeat all these areas in case you're still watching. We went underneath the scarf, then I came down in front of, right next to where I originally highlighted. Then I started right where this area was, and it should be dry by now. I came down and around. I walked this out a little bit. I did the same thing over here, only I kept the shade just on that outside edge over there. I didn't walk it out like I did over here. And then I also came along the bottom. I can see I have a little bit more snow here. Okay, so let's go back up to the top. We need to shade that a little bit more. You guys all hanging in there with me? I hope so. We're going to shade along the top. I have a nice narrow float loaded in my brush. And when I say that, what I'm saying is I've loaded less paint into the brush. You can control how wide your floats are by how much paint you put into them. So what I'm doing is I'm curving around and coming down. We'll go around those little birds, and I'm going to keep that nice and narrow right above the hat band. I think it's so interesting because I think if I painted this 10 times, each time it would turn out just a little bit differently. So glad you're all here. Thank you. Thank you. Fond memories of convention in Peoria. Thank you. One thing I've loved about having my career go as long as it is all the friends I have made over the years.